The lawyer who came to force me to hand over my grandfather's $38.6 million trust didn't know I already had the one thing that could destroy everyone sitting on his side of the table. Months later, I watched him stop mid-sentence, take off his glasses, and ask for a private meeting after seeing the evidence my father never meant to hand me. My name is Marenza Vale. I was 34, serving as a logistics captain in the U.S. Army when my grandfather died. I thought I was protecting his final wish. I had no idea I was about to discover that my father's new wife hadn't just married into my family. She had been planning her way into our fortune long before she ever met him. Chapter 1. The Secret. My grandfather asked me to keep Adrian Pike's hand stopped halfway across the conference table. It was not a dramatic tremor. He did not drop the folder or lose control of his face. He simply placed the documents down slightly crooked, removed his glasses, and asked for a few minutes alone with his client. Across from him, Naomi Reddick said nothing. She did not need to. The folder contained a sworn statement from my bank security logs tied to an attempted account reset, metadata from an authorization carrying my forged signature, an email my father had forwarded without my permission, and photographs proving Adrian had known Maribel before she claimed to have met my father. That was the moment he understood this was no longer an ordinary trust dispute. A few months earlier, that same man had walked into my apartment with the confidence of someone who believed one signature could open every locked door in my life. At the time, I was carrying a secret worth nearly $39 million. I had no idea how far my father's new wife was willing to go to reach it. My grandfather, Silas Vale, died on February 18, 2025, after 20 months of pancreatic cancer. I was 34 years old, a logistics captain in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Bliss and living in an apartment off post in El Paso. When the call came, I was reviewing a shipment discrepancy in my office. The nurse said my name softly before telling me he was gone. I already knew. For 9 months, I had learned the difference between the silence of sleep and the silence of a body giving up. I drove to San Antonio that night. My mother, Corinne, had left when I was 5. My father, Graham, was always chasing a contract, opening a business, saving a business, or explaining why the next project would finally change everything. My grandparents raised me in the spaces between his promises. My grandmother, Judith, died in 2010. After that, Silas became the person I called first. He was not affectionate in obvious ways. He fixed my car before I knew something was wrong with it. He sent money before I admitted I needed help. He remembered the dates of my evaluations, my transfers, and every promotion I tried to pretend did not matter. During the last 9 months of his illness, I used 4 periods of leave totaling 41 days. I knew he would only take his medication with cold apple juice. I knew his jaw tightened when his pain was worse than he admitted. I knew the night nurse was named Carla and that the dosage changed every Thursday. When his eyesight weakened, I read him the business section and the sports page. One night, I slept in the chair beside his bed, woke before dawn, and logged into work from the hospital cafeteria. Silas saw the laptop and frowned. "You are supposed to be on leave," he said. I told him leave did not make supply problems disappear. He looked at me for a long moment, then said that was exactly why he trusted me. His funeral was held on February 24th. My father arrived with his fiancée, Maribel Crane. Graham was 58, Maribel was 49. They moved through the church like a carefully rehearsed couple. My father accepted condolences with both hands. He told people he and Silas had talked often near the end. I stood 3 feet away and listened. Graham did not know the name of Silas's oncologist. He did not know his father had stopped driving the previous fall. He did not know Silas had been unable to eat solid food during his final weeks. He had visited 3 times in 9 months. I did not correct him. Watching him cry was not what hurt. What hurt was hearing him describe a closeness he had not chosen while Silas was alive. Maribel performed grief beautifully. She guided guests to their seats, accepted flowers, organized food, and rested one hand on Graham's shoulder whenever someone important approached. She called my grandfather Dad, though she had met him only a handful of times. She also watched Harold Kessler, Silas's attorney. She watched Elaine Porter, his former accountant. She listened whenever someone mentioned Vail Commercial Builders, the Lake House, or company shares. 3 days after the funeral, Harold asked me to meet him at his office in Austin. He closed the door, placed a thick file on the desk, and told me Silas had created a revocable living trust in 2018. He had amended it on March 14, 2024. The preliminary value was $38.6 million. It was not a pile of cash. The trust held $14.2 million in investments, $11.4 million in company shares, $9.1 million in real estate, and $3.9 million in cash and short-term bonds. The real estate included a lake house at Lake Travis, a rental townhouse in Austin, and a commercial warehouse in New Braunfels. Harold would serve as temporary successor trustee during the transfer. I was the primary beneficiary. Once the initial administration was complete, I would become successor trustee. My father had not been cut out. He would receive $4,000 a month for 10 years and an additional $150,000 for personal debt. He would not have authority to manage the trust mortgage, its properties, or use its assets as collateral. I asked Harold why Silas had structured it that way. Harold folded his hands and said my grandfather did not want to punish his son. He simply did not trust Graham to recognize the difference between saving a troubled business and gambling an entire family estate. Then Harold gave me a sealed letter. Silas had instructed me not to disclose the full inventory yet. I was not to sign anything under family pressure. I was supposed to watch whether my father still made decisions in his own voice. The rest of Silas's files were to remain sealed unless someone tried to access the trust through fraud threats or litigation. Silas did not call Maddie Bell a criminal. He wrote that her questions about collateral management authority and business insurance had made him uneasy. Keeping the trust secret from my father felt like betrayal. Ignoring the warning of the man who had always shown up felt worse. Graham and Maddie Bell married on April 5th. The wedding had been planned before Silas died, so they refused to postpone it. Maddie Bell never asked me how much money there was. She was more careful than that. She said Graham was too grief-stricken to handle family paperwork. She said transparency prevented resentment. She said a family legacy should not be controlled by one person. Later, Elaine quietly told me Maddie Bell had asked whether Silas still owned shares in his former companies. When Maddie Bell found me alone near the reception hall, she lowered her voice. Silence can look a lot like control when an older man dies and one relative has all the paperwork. I told her every financial question had to go through Harold. 5 days later, she appeared at my apartment in El Paso with Adrian Pike. Adrian said he was helping my father understand his rights. He placed a family disclosure acknowledgement on my table. The document asked me to confirm that I was not withholding information affecting Graham, that I had not influenced Silas while he lacked capacity, and that I would provide trust documents upon reasonable family request. I read it once and slid it back. I said all future requests had to be sent to Harold in writing. While Adrian continued talking, Maribel lifted her phone as if checking a message. After they left, I reviewed the apartment camera. Her phone had been aimed toward my mail tray, an old envelope from Graham, my desk, and a photograph of Silas and me at the lake house. The footage did not prove what she had photographed. It proved she had not come only to talk. Harold called less than 20 minutes later. Someone claiming to be a vendor compliance consultant had contacted his office about the ownership records of 2 companies Silas had invested in. The caller knew the company names, the date of Silas's death, Harold's identity, and the existence of a successor beneficiary. The consulting firm did not exist. Harold asked whether I had told anyone about the trust. I said no. I looked again at the frozen image of Maribel holding her phone over my mail. Then I told Harold to stop sending documents through ordinary email, preserve every call log, and use secure communication only. That was when I stopped thinking of Maddie Bell as a woman asking inappropriate questions. She already knew enough to search for the door. Now she was looking for a key. Chapter 2. When my father started speaking in her voice. My father called before I had finished saving the camera footage. He did not ask whether I was all right. Family transparency should not feel like an attack, he said. I went still. Maribel had used those exact words at the wedding. Not something similar. Not the same idea phrased differently. The same sentence delivered with the same patient disappointment. That was when I understood my father was no longer speaking in his own voice. He said Silas had spent his entire life doubting him. He said I had been beside my grandfather when he was sick, tired, and vulnerable. He said anyone would have questions about documents signed during that period. I nearly told him everything. I nearly told him about the $4,000 a month, the 10 years of guaranteed income, and the additional $150,000 Silas had set aside for his personal debts. Then I remembered Harold's warning. Adrian was not asking questions to understand the trust. He was creating a record. I told Graham all financial requests had to go through Harold. My father gave a bitter laugh. That is exactly what Maribel said you would do. He told me Vale Home Renewal was in trouble. The company still brought in roughly $2.8 million a year, but revenue was not the same as cash. Graham had expanded too quickly in 2023, purchased trucks and equipment with borrowed money, and counted on a commercial renovation contract that was later canceled. A $420,000 loan was coming due. He owed suppliers another $110,000 and needed nearly $70,000 in working capital to keep projects moving. 18 people depended on the company. 7 had worked for him for years. Maribel had convinced him the trust could lend the business $600,000 without harming anyone. She called it saving Silas's legacy. I called it exactly what my grandfather had tried to prevent. Graham said if Silas had loved him, he would not have allowed his company to fail while leaving me control of nearly $39 million. I wanted to say Silas had loved him enough to protect him from making one desperate decision that could destroy everything. Instead, I told him to speak with Harold. My father heard caution and translated it into guilt. By the end of the week, Maribel's version of the story had reached the rest of the family. My great-aunt Miriam Bell called on Sunday afternoon. She was Silas's younger sister, 60 years old, retired, and usually careful about taking sides. That day, she had already chosen one. She said money should not be allowed to destroy a family. She said Graham was grieving. She said I could share enough to help him and still have more than I would ever need. Then she said something that stayed with me. A caregiver should not turn love into ownership. I looked through my apartment window at the dry El Paso light and asked how many times she had visited Silas during his final year. Miriam paused. That is not the point, she said. It was exactly the point. Through Miriam, I learned Maribel had been telling relatives I controlled Silas's schedule, restricted Graham's access, and used my military discipline to pressure an elderly man who no longer understood complicated financial documents. I could not release Silas's medical records to defend myself. I could not publish trust documents because strangers had begun trying to obtain them. So I said nothing publicly. Silence protected the estate. It also made me look guilty. 3 days later, Lydia Chen from my bank called. Her voice was calm and precise. Someone had attempted to reset my security questions using an old address, a former phone number, and a birth date that was off by 2 digits. The caller claimed to be a relative helping with an account connected to a family trust. The bank denied the request. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, changed every authentication method, saved the time and reference number of Lydia's call, and requested preservation of the access logs. I did not accuse anyone. Suspicion was not proof, no matter how obvious the pattern felt. I also reported the identity issue through the appropriate channel at Fort Bliss. Captain Mara Ellis listened without interrupting. She reminded me not to use government equipment, personnel, or systems for a private legal dispute. She told me to document every contact and request emergency leave properly if I needed it. Then she said documentation was not paranoia when someone had already tried to become me. For the first time since Silas died, someone did not tell me to be generous, forgiving, or understanding. She told me to protect the record. That evening, I reviewed the apartment footage frame by frame. The envelope Maribel had photographed was from Graham. He had mailed it in 2022 after I updated several family emergency records. The front showed my old address. Through the paper window, part of a former phone number was visible. It was enough to explain how someone could answer security questions almost correctly. Then I watched Maribel angle her phone toward the photograph of Silas and me at the Lake Travis house. We were standing on the dock, both sunburned, holding a fish too small to justify how proud we looked. Seeing her photograph, it hurt more than seeing her aim at my mail. She was not only collecting financial information, she was converting my memories into evidence for a story she wanted to control. My cousin Tamsin called the next morning. She worked in medical records administration and understood the difference between information that was accessible and information people merely believed they had a right to see. She had searched only public court filings, property records, and business registrations. Maribel had been married twice before. Her first marriage ended after a dispute involving a limited financial authorization and the sale of 2 auto parts stores. Her second husband had accused her of trying to force him into a cognitive evaluation so she could control his financial decisions. Adrian Pike's name appeared in records connected to that second dispute. Tamsin said she had more to check. I told her to stay inside public records and send nothing through work systems. 2 days later, Harold called from Austin. His voice sounded different. A document had been delivered to his office titled Limited Authorization to Release Trust Information. It carried my name and what appeared to be my signature. It authorized Adrian Pike to receive the trust amendment beneficiary records, part of the inventory, and communications between Silas and me. I told Harold I had never seen it. By that afternoon, we had hired Naomi Reddick, a trust litigation attorney based in El Paso. Naomi did not begin by accusing Maribel or Adrian. She began by preserving evidence. She requested the original digital file metadata transmission history, audit records, notary information, and server logs from the sender. She said the fastest way to weaken a strong case was to claim more than the evidence could prove. Then she turned the document toward me. The signature was good enough to fool someone who had never watched me sign my name. It was not good enough to fool me. The final stroke curved upward in a way I stopped using years earlier. I had signed that way on a military form in 2022. I opened my sent folder. The form was there. I had emailed it to Graham after he asked for updated emergency contact and insurance information. A clear scan existed in my account, his account, and a protected military archive. The protected archive had not been accessed. That left my father. I called him. I asked whether he had ever forwarded one of my military forms to Maribel. His answer came too quickly. Maribel was helping organize the family paperwork. I do not remember every attachment. I closed my eyes. I did not accuse him of forging anything. I did not ask how he could hand over my private records without telling me. Naomi later reminded me that the email did not prove Graham knew how the signature would be used, but it proved Maribel had access because he gave it to her. The person who had copied my name was not a stranger hiding outside my life. The signature had reached them through my own father. Chapter 3. The box that didn't contain a victory. 2 days later, Harold called and asked me to come to Austin. He did not explain much over the phone. He only said the conditions Silas had written into his instructions had been met. Someone had tried to use my identity to reach the trust. That meant the rest of my grandfather's files could finally be released. The box was waiting on Harold's conference table when I arrived. It was made of dark walnut, scratched along one corner with a brass latch I remembered from the desk in Silas's study. For a moment, I could not touch it. Harold sat across from me and kept his hands folded. "This is not a verdict," he said. "Your grandfather wanted you to understand that." "What is it then?" A warning assembled by a cautious man who hoped he was wrong. Inside were handwritten journals, sealed letters, trust notes, a flash drive, and a thick report prepared by a private investigator named Samuel Ortiz. There was no confession from Maribel, no document showing she had ordered someone to copy my signature, no perfect piece of evidence that could end everything. Silas had left me a direction, not a victory. I opened the first journal. His handwriting had grown smaller near the end, but it was still precise. He wrote that Maribel had known the estimated value of the Lake Travis property before Graham claimed to have discussed it with her. She had asked whether Vail Commercial Builders still carried key person insurance. She had suggested moving family holdings under one management structure. In another entry, Silas wrote that she had asked whether the lake house could be used as collateral. Then I found a sentence underlined once in black ink. I hope I am wrong. A lonely man deserves comfort. But comfort should not arrive with questions about collateral. I read it twice. Silas had not believed himself infallible. He had worried that age and experience had made him too suspicious. He had seen enough predatory deals in business to recognize patterns, but he also knew Graham was lonely. That uncertainty made the warning more frightening, not less. He had not wanted Maribel to be guilty. He had simply refused to leave us unprotected if she was. The flash drive held one video. Silas sat in his study, wearing the blue cardigan Judith had given him years earlier. His face looked thinner than I remembered, but his voice was steady. "Marenza, if you are watching this, then someone has crossed a line I hoped would remain untouched." I covered my mouth. He explained why he had chosen me. Not because I was more obedient, not because I had spent more time beside his hospital bed. He said he trusted me because I knew how to say no, including to myself. He said Graham would receive income and help with his debts because he loved his son, but he did not trust Graham to separate saving Vail home renewal from gambling the estate. Then Silas leaned closer to the camera. "Do not use this box to punish anyone because you are angry. If my concerns are wrong, close it. Let your father be happy. But if they are right, protect what I built without becoming cruel." He paused before mentioning 2013. That was the year I began my military career and discovered how quickly travel uniforms, equipment, and deposits could empty a bank account. Silas had sent me $6,800 before I admitted I was struggling. He reminded me in the video that no one should have to choose between serving and having a fair start. By the time the recording ended, I was crying. I was grateful he had trusted me. I was also angry. He had placed a fortune, a family, and an unfinished investigation in my hands, then left me to decide what justice was supposed to look like. Harold waited until I could breathe normally again. "Samuel's report is factual," he said. "No illegal recordings, no private account access, no speculation presented as proof." Samuel Ortiz was 67, a retired police investigator who had worked privately for years. He had reviewed public marriage records, property filings, business registrations, event calendars, and civil cases. He had photographed Maribel and Adrián only in public locations. The report showed them meeting at least 3 times in 2023. One photograph was dated July 2023. Maribel and Adrián were leaving a restaurant near the office of the asset management firm Silas used. Graham claimed he had not met Maribel until November. The photograph did not prove what they discussed. It proved their relationship began earlier than either of them had admitted. Tamsin added the digital connections Samuel could not have found before Silas died. She located sponsorship lists and registration records from the November charity gala where Maribel supposedly met Graham by chance. The invitation had come through an associate who had previously worked with Adrian. Samuel found the meetings, Tamsin told me. I found who opened the door. Naomi began contacting Maribel's former husbands. Wesley Trent refused the first 3 calls. When he finally agreed to speak, his voice was guarded. "I signed what she put in front of me," he said. "That is my part in it." He told us Maribel had convinced him that his adult son wanted control of his company. Adrian had described a limited financial authorization as a transparency measure. Wesley later learned the document allowed broader access than he understood. By the time the marriage ended, 2 of his auto parts stores had been sold. "People think men like me stay quiet because we are protecting her," he said. "We are protecting ourselves from looking stupid." He eventually agreed to provide a narrow affidavit. It established a pattern. It did not prove who forged my signature. Dr. Hollis Mercer was even more reluctant. At 71, he had remarried and wanted no public connection to the most humiliating period of his life. Maribel had urged him to undergo a cognitive evaluation and repeatedly said he needed protection from his own decisions. Adrian had appeared during those discussions. Hollis agreed to let Naomi use public records and a limited statement, but only after I spoke to him myself. "I understand wanting the story to disappear," I told him, "but silence is one reason she believes she could repeat it." He was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "Use what you legally can." On May 12th, a process server came to my apartment. The petition was filed in Bexar County Probate Court. My father was the petitioner. The document alleged undue influence, lack of capacity, restricted family access, and improper involvement in the March 2024 Trust Amendment. Adrian requested limited discovery covering my communications with Silas, medical capacity records, beneficiary documents, and my role during the amendment process. Naomi immediately objected to the broader requests and moved to protect the inventory. Elaine Porter agreed to testify that Silas still understood company shares, property values, and beneficiary decisions in late 2024. Dr. Nathan Cho confirmed that cancer treatment did not automatically remove a patient's capacity, and that Silas understood the people, property, and consequences involved when the amendment was signed. The evidence should have steadied me. Instead, I kept staring at the final page of the petition. Graham Vale. My father's signature sat beneath statements claiming I had isolated Silas, controlled his decisions, and turned caregiving into influence. Miriam called that evening and asked why I would not simply share enough money to stop the case. "You are making everyone choose sides," she said. "No," I replied. "Someone filed a case. That created the sides." A week later, Naomi and Tamsin completed the timeline. Silas was diagnosed in June 2023. Maribel met Adrian in July. She did not publicly meet Graham until November. We still could not prove the relationship was a planned approach, but one question had become impossible to ignore. Why had Maribel needed an estate litigator before there was an estate dispute? The answer was not yet in Silas's box. What the box revealed was the shape of the plan. Maribel had not only found a grieving, insecure man, she had turned him into the one thing she needed more than a husband, a plaintiff with legal standing. And Graham had signed willingly. Chapter 4. I let them believe I was losing. The court did not give my father everything Adrian had asked for. Judge Helena Ward limited discovery to Silas's capacity, of the timing of the March 2024 amendment, direct communications about beneficiaries, and my role in the signing process. Adrian was not allowed to inspect the entire trust inventory. That mattered. Maribel wanted numbers, account locations, property values, and enough access to turn the trust into leverage. Instead, Naomi gave the court only what was relevant. The video from March 14th showed Silas seated beside independent counsel, answering questions without help. He identified the Lake Travis house, the Austin townhouse, the New Braunfels warehouse, both company holdings, and the income Graham would receive. He understood that I would control most of the trust. He explained why. Dr. Nathan Cho confirmed that Silas's treatment had not prevented him from understanding people, property, or consequences. Elaine Porter testified that Silas still reviewed financial reports and corrected valuation errors late in 2024. The evidence was strong. It was not enough to end the case immediately. Adrian shifted from arguing that Silas had been confused to suggesting I had shaped his fears over time. The accusation changed, but the target remained me. Between legal meetings, I returned to Fort Bliss and tried to behave as though my family was not attempting to turn 18 months of caregiving into evidence of manipulation. One morning, after less than 4 hours of sleep, I entered the wrong unit number on a logistics inventory report. A sergeant caught it before the report was submitted. No shipment was delayed, no equipment was misplaced. Still, I stared at the correction until the numbers blurred. Captain Mara Ellis called me into her office that afternoon. "You need to use leave properly," she said. "I can still do my job." That is not what I said. I looked down at my hands. For weeks, I had treated exhaustion as proof that I was strong enough to carry everything. Mara leaned back in her chair. "Strength is not pretending something does not hurt you." I admitted I had considered giving Graham money just to stop the lawsuit. I told her I was afraid I would keep the trust and lose the only parent I had left. Then I said the thing I had not allowed myself to say aloud. I am angry with Silas. Mara waited. He knew my father better than I did. He knew this could happen, and he left me to finish it. She nodded once. Then be angry. After that, decide what the responsibility requires. I took 2 days of leave. I finished the timeline Naomi needed, preserved every email, and prepared for mediation. I did not offer to rescue Vale Home Renewal. Maribel had already begun using the company's employees as emotional pressure. A man named Russell Dean called me from San Antonio. He had worked for Graham for 11 years. He was careful and embarrassed. "Ms. Vale, I am not calling to threaten you. I know. Your father says the company may not make payroll this summer. Russell told me about the 18 employees, the apprentices with young children, and the 7 people who had stayed through every difficult year. He asked whether the trust could make a temporary loan. I felt guilty because his fear was real. He had not forged a document. He had not filed a petition. He wanted to keep his job. But a crisis did not create a right to someone else's assets. "I am sorry you were placed in the middle of this," I said. "The trust cannot be used as collateral or as leverage in the lawsuit." He was quiet. "So that is a no." "Yes." After the call, I sat alone in my apartment and hated how cold the words sounded. Then I remembered that manipulation worked best when the person applying pressure found an innocent face to stand in front of it. Mediation took place in Austin on June 18th. Constance Reyes, a retired judge, served only as mediator. She made that clear before we began. "This room is for negotiation," she said. "I am not deciding the case." I sat beside Naomi. Harold sat across the corner as temporary trustee. Graham sat beside Maribel. Adrian proposed that my father receive co-management authority over selected assets that the trust loan Vale Home Renewal, $600,000, and that I release a limited inventory. In exchange, Graham would withdraw the petition. Naomi closed the proposal. "That is not settlement," she said. "It is control with a different label." Adrian argued that the loan would preserve jobs and protect a company connected to the Vale name. Harold responded that Silas had specifically prohibited using trust property to secure Graham's business obligations. Then Harold disclosed only what was necessary. Silas had undergone an independent capacity review. Graham had not been disinherited. Samuel Ortiz had been hired before the amendment. The limited authorization was under examination. At the mention of Samuel, Maribel's expression changed, only for a second. Her fingers tightened around her pen, then relaxed. Constance turned to Graham. "If your father provided income and debt relief, why do you need management authority instead of accepting what he chose to give you?" Graham looked at Adrian, then at Maribel. "It is not only about money," he said. "What is it about?" "My father never believed I could build anything." Constance waited, but he offered nothing more. Mediation ended without agreement. Maribel would not support withdrawing the petition without access to the inventory or authority over a trust loan. In the hallway afterward, I gave Graham the sealed letter Silas had written for him. He opened it before leaving the building. I watched his face as he read. Silas wrote that he loved his son. He wrote that a smaller company did not make Graham a failure. What made him fail was treating every warning as an insult. He explained that the annuity was not pity, it was protection against a panicked decision. He wrote that I had been given responsibility because I did not need money to prove I mattered. The last line asked Graham to choose his daughter before it became impossible to repair the damage. My father folded the letter slowly. "He is still controlling everyone," he said, "even now." I did not defend Silas. "Then do not believe the letter." Graham looked at me. "Check what she asked you to give her." 3 days later, Lydia provided an affidavit about the attempted bank reset. The request had originated from an address connected to a business network in the same office building as Adrian's firm. It happened the same day the false authorization was created. The caller had used information visible on the envelope Maddie Bell photographed. It did not prove Adrian had made the request. Multiple businesses used that building. It was enough for Naomi to send a preservation demand covering server logs, device access, and communications. She also sent Adrian a formal conflict notice. While that process moved forward, Graham searched his old email. He found the DD form I had sent in 2022. He found the January 2025 message where he forwarded it to Maribel. Her reply said she wanted to organize emergency family documents before the wedding. The file had been downloaded again after Silas died. He also found a later email in which Maribel told Adrian she had sent him a sample. There was no attachment left in Graham's account. Naomi would need the preserved records to determine what the sample contained. But my father no longer needed a court order to understand what he had enabled. He asked me to meet him at the Lake Travis house. Naomi knew where I was going and when I expected to leave. Graham was already standing on the porch when I arrived. He had not been there in years. Inside the house still held Silas in ordinary things. The repair notebook beside the kitchen drawer, his fishing rod near the back door, the wooden box where I had kept fireflies as a child, a photograph of Silas Graham and me taken before silence became the family's most reliable habit. My father walked to the old porch chair and touched the back of it. "I sent her the form," he said. "I know. I thought she was helping." He handed me printed emails. He admitted he had signed the petition because he believed I had taken the final chance for Silas to respect him. He admitted he had not read every statement Adrian filed. Then he said the truth underneath all the others. I wanted the trust to save the company because I could not stand the idea that my father had been right about me. His voice broke. He looked at the page in his hand. "I gave her the page she used against you. I did not hug him. I did not tell him it was all right." "What are you going to do with that?"
"I will withdraw the petition. Naomi can have everything. I will stop asking the trust to save the company."
"Do it because it is true, not because you want me to make this easier for you."
He nodded. The preserved records filled in what Graham's inbox could not. Naomi assembled the bank affidavit, the authorization metadata, Graham's forwarded form, the recovered reference to the sample, Samuel's photographs, Wesley's affidavit, and Hollis's records.
At the pre-hearing meeting, she placed the folder in front of Adrian. His hand stopped. He set it down slightly crooked, removed his glasses, and asked for a private conversation with Maddie Bell. When they returned, Adrian announced he would withdraw because of a conflict and advised her to obtain independent counsel. Maddie Bell looked at Graham. For the first time since she entered our family, she was not telling the story. She was realizing that the truth had been recorded somewhere she could no longer reach. Chapter 4. I let them file the lie. The next decision was harder than anything I had done since waking up. By September 26th, I could communicate more quickly through eye tracking, but every session still left me exhausted. Mara sat beside my rehabilitation bed, while Detective Marcus Bell and Assistant State's Attorney Alicia Monroe joined by secure video. Julian appeared from a conference room at Vantage Shield Systems. The evidence against Grant was growing, but it was not complete. The vehicle examination proved deliberate tampering. The camera footage linked Grant to Graham. Mallory's messages showed that she had provided my schedule and route. What they still needed was a direct connection between Grant and the payment, a clearer picture of what Mallory knew before the crash, and proof that the forged stock agreement was being used rather than merely prepared. I selected words on the screen. "Tell employees I am awake." Julian shook his head. "If Grant knows he may withdraw the stock transfer, destroy records, threaten Graham, or leave Chicago. He is already moving faster than the board expected. I looked toward Mara. She understood what I was asking. How much damage can he still do? Julian answered carefully. We can protect payroll, employee benefits, client data, and the production network. We cannot guarantee he will not move money through access he already has before the fraud controls catch it. I entered my condition one word at a time. No employee money. No customer data. Do not let him hurt anyone for evidence. Alicia nodded. No one is asking you to allow additional harm. If a transaction occurs before we can stop it, we preserve it. We do not create the crime. I agreed to remain silent a few days longer, not because I wanted Grant to steal more, because I needed him to believe the lie was still working. 3 days later, he formally submitted the stock transfer agreement to the board and the bank. The document claimed I had transferred 35% of my voting shares to him on September 3rd. Wesley Trent, a 44-year-old mobile notary, certified that I had signed it in a Chicago office. Mara dismantled the date before the end of the afternoon. On September 3rd, I had been in New York for an industry conference. My airline records hotel key activity conference, video, and calendar all placed me there. Then Priya examined the digital file. It had been created on September 12th, 4 days after the crash. North Star Bridge LLC had paid Wesley $9,500 shortly afterward. Mara held the document where I could see it. He did not simply make a false paper, she said. He submitted it to obtain rights he did not have. That matters. Grant used the same document and older account permissions to request access to a corporate line of credit. The bank released $175,000 before Mara and Julian learned the transfer had cleared. They did not allow it to continue. The fraud alert went into effect that morning. A second loan request for $640,000 was frozen before disbursement. The money already moved created a clear trail. $90,000 went to North Star Bridge LLC. $45,000 paid part of Grant's gambling debt. $25,000 went to Mallory. $9,500 went to Wesley Trent. $5,500 went to Carter Knox. Julian stared at the transaction report on the screen. He is paying everyone from the same chain. He thinks speed is protecting him, Mara said. It is documenting him. Carter Knox was 29, a freelance penetration tester with a prior conviction for unauthorized access. Grant had hired him to search for the Vance Innovation Trust, the Aegis licensing agreement, the succession plan, and any access key connected to the independent trustee. Priya had already isolated the section Grant was trying to reach. She replaced it with a controlled honeypot inside the company's own network. It did not install anything on Carter's device. It did not reach into his files. It simply recorded what he chose to do after Grant provided credentials. The logs captured his IP address, device fingerprint, login time, search terms, and the exact files he attempted to open. They also captured the connection between his payment and North Star Bridge LLC. Priya spoke to me through the tablet. He searched for trust distributions, trustee override keys, and IP transfer authority. He was not browsing by accident. Grant had wanted a shortcut into the structure protecting my company. Instead, he had left a digital record of what he intended to steal. At the emergency guardianship hearing, Diane and Grant tried to present themselves as the only people acting in my interest. Diane testified that I had always been consumed by work, that Mara cared more about the company than my recovery, and that moving me to long-term care would be compassionate. Evelyn Park presented the advance directive. Dr. Naomi presented the eye tracking evaluations, my consistent responses, and the rehabilitation plan. The court declined to grant Grant emergency guardianship and kept Mara in place as my healthcare proxy while my capacity continued to be evaluated. It was not the final ruling, but it stopped him from moving me. After the hearing, a recording from the courthouse hallway captured Mallory confronting Grant. "You told my mother it was only a mechanical problem." Grant answered in a low voice. "She knows enough to stay quiet." Diane had been standing close enough to hear. She could have withdrawn from the petition. She could have called police. She could have warned the hospital. Instead, she turned to Mallory. "We have gone too far to stop now. If Lenora takes control again, you will have nothing." That sentence ended the last excuse I had ever made for my mother. She had not hired Graham. There was no evidence she knew about the plan before the crash. But after learning the truth, she chose Mallory again. Investigators later documented the actions she took after that choice. She signed an affidavit falsely claiming I could not understand medical decisions. She denied knowing about the updated advance directive, even though camera footage showed her handling a copy in my home. She helped Grant remove a box of financial records. She told Evelyn I had wanted rehabilitation stopped, though no such instruction existed. Her crimes were not the same as Grant's. Her betrayal was still a decision. By September 29th, police approached Graham Pike. He hired an attorney before speaking. At first, he insisted Grant only wanted the vehicle disabled long enough to make me miss a meeting. When Marcus showed him photographs of the wreck, Graham's story changed. He admitted Grant paid him $12,000. Grant supplied my license plate and parking location. Mallory provided the time I would leave Oak Brook and the route I normally took. After the crash, Grant threatened Graham's family if he spoke. Graham turned over messages, photographs of the cash, the payment envelope, garage video, and call records. He would still face consequences for tampering with the vehicle. His cooperation could reduce them. It would not erase what he had done. Nolan chose a quieter confrontation. He met Mallory at their house and asked about North Star Bridge, LLC. She told him Grant had only needed help with paperwork. Nolan placed a printed copy of the filing on the table. "Did you use my signature?" Mallory looked away. "You are making this bigger than it is. My name is attached to financial records I never approved. Grant said it was temporary." Nolan did not tell her what else he knew. He did not mention the message proving Grant planned to leave Chicago alone. He sent everything to his attorney, an independent forensic accountant, and his firm's compliance department. When he brought the message to Mara and me, I read it twice. Grant intended to move the money, sell Aegis, and leave Mallory holding the L. See the forged records and the transfers. For most of my life, Mallory had believed someone would rescue her from consequences. My mother had done it. I had done it. Grant had promised to do it. This time, I would not. 4 days before the board meeting, Grant demanded an emergency special session for Monday, October 6th. He wanted the board to recognize the stock transfer, appoint him interim executive chair, approve the sale of Aegis, and eliminate 27 engineering positions. Helena Ward agreed to convene the meeting so the dispute could be resolved formally. Mara filed for an emergency injunction and kept the timing confidential. By then, I had been moved into neurological rehabilitation. Dr. Naomi approved a supervised medical leave for several hours on the morning of the meeting. A specialized vehicle would take me to the office. A medical professional would remain with me. If my blood pressure or neurological symptoms worsened, I would appear by video instead. The night before, I practiced speaking. Each sentence required more breath than it should have. Mara sat beside me. "You do not have to go in person." I forced the words out slowly. "They need to see the person they tried to erase." On Monday morning, Grant walked into Vantage Shield Systems believing he was about to become the man who controlled my company. At the same time, I left the rehabilitation center through a private entrance in a wheelchair. I did not know how long my body would hold, but for the first time in 28 days, I was going back to the place that still carried my name. Chapter 5. The House She Could Never Take. Adrian withdrew from the case 4 days before the hearing. A new attorney appeared on Graham's behalf, but only to handle the remaining procedure. My father had already instructed him to withdraw the allegations of undue influence and lack of capacity. Maribel did not accept that quietly. She told Graham the emails had been misunderstood. She said Adrian had only used my signature as a sample while preparing documents. She warned that Vale Home Renewal would collapse if he walked away from the trust. Then she used the argument she knew would hurt him most. She said withdrawing would prove Silas had always been right about him. Graham still feared losing the company. He did not suddenly become brave, wise, or easy to forgive. He simply stopped giving Maribel new documents. Every email download notice and attachment he found went directly to Naomi. The evidentiary hearing took place on July 22, 2025, before Judge Helena Ward. The courtroom was smaller than people imagine when they hear the word hearing. There was no jury and no dramatic audience, just 2 counsel tables, a clerk, the judge, and a record that would preserve what each person chose to say. Naomi presented only what mattered. Silas had created the trust in 2018 and amended it on March 14, 2024. He had independent counsel. Dr. Nathan Cho confirmed that Silas understood the people in his life, the property he owned, and the consequences of changing his estate plan. Elaine Porter confirmed that he still reviewed valuations, corrected financial reports, and discussed both company holdings in detail. The video from the amendment meeting showed Silas explaining that Graham would receive $4,000 a month for 10 years and another $150,000 for debt relief. He understood that I would receive primary control. He understood why. I had not answered questions for him. I had not told him what to sign. I had not even been in the room when the final amendment was executed. Naomi also addressed the limited authorization carrying my signature. She did not accuse Maribel of creating it. She said its authenticity was disputed, its origin was under investigation, and it could not be relied upon to obtain trust records. Graham's attorney then confirmed that my father no longer intended to maintain the accusations against me. Judge Ward asked Graham whether that decision was voluntary. He stood slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was uneven. He admitted he had signed the petition while angry and ashamed. He said he had allowed guilt over his absence from Silas's final months to become suspicion toward me. He admitted sharing a private document without my permission. He said he could not confirm that the signature on the authorization was genuine. Then he withdrew the allegations. It was not a perfect apology. It was not supposed to be. It was the first time my father had chosen a difficult truth over a comforting lie. Judge Ward affirmed the trust and the March 2024 amendment. She denied the remaining requests for broader disclosure and confirmed Harold's authority to continue administering the trust during the transition. The limited authorization was rejected. The court allowed the disputed materials to be provided to the appropriate authorities for separate review. Judge Ward did not declare Maribel guilty. No one was arrested in the courtroom. There was no speech about greed family or karma. The legal victory was quieter than that. The trust remained closed to the people who had tried to force it open. After the hearing, Naomi submitted the records to investigators. My bank opened its own fraud review. The State Bar accepted a complaint concerning Adrian's conduct, and his office was required to preserve server logs and communications. Wesley Trent and Dr. Hollis Mercer agreed to cooperate within the limits of the law. On September 3rd, I was informed that investigators were examining possible attempted identity theft, forgery, fraudulent use of an authorization, and coordination between Maribel and Adrian. There was no conviction yet, and I refused to pretend an investigation was the same as a verdict. But the pattern Maribel had relied on was no longer private. The forged paper created metadata. The bank call created logs. The former husbands she expected to remain ashamed agreed to speak. The husband she had turned into a plaintiff withdrew his claims. The lawyer she used to pressure me had to preserve his own records. She had tried to make the trust transparent. Instead, she made herself visible. Miriam sent me a message after the hearing. She said she had spoken about fairness without knowing who had actually been present during Silas's final months. She did not ask me to forgive her. I read the message and left it unanswered for several days. Some apologies deserve consideration before they receive comfort. Graham filed for divorce on August 8th. I did not use the trust to save Vale Home Renewal. He sold the expensive SUV Maribel had encouraged him to buy. He sold equipment the company did not need, moved into a smaller office, renegotiated the $420,000 loan, and arranged payment plans with suppliers. He reduced the number of active projects, but kept a core group of employees. The company survived. It was no longer impressive from the outside. For the first time, Graham was building something he could actually afford. He received exactly what Silas had left him, $4,000 a month and the $150,000 distribution. Nothing more. He also began counseling. I learned that accountability looks less dramatic than punishment. It looks like showing up every week, naming the harm without blaming someone else, and accepting that forgiveness may not arrive on schedule. By fall, the trust transition was complete. I became successor trustee, but I did not try to manage $38.6 million alone. I hired an independent fiduciary, a tax advisor, an asset management firm, and corporate counsel for the company holdings. Maribel had wanted control because control was the prize. I wanted the assets protected well enough that no one person, including me, could act recklessly with them. I stayed in the Army. One of my fellow officers asked why I did not resign immediately. I told her money had changed the size of my responsibilities, not the person I wanted to be. In November, I used $750,000 from a lawful distribution to establish the Silas and Judith Vale Service Family Scholarship Fund. It supported children from military families, especially those who had changed schools repeatedly because of a parent's orders. I thought about the $6,800 Silas sent me in 2013 before I admitted I needed help. The fund was not proof that I deserved the trust. It was a way to continue something he had already begun. I repaired the Lake Travis house without erasing it. I kept the old hardwood floors, Silas's porch chair, his repair notebook, Judith's kitchenware, the fishing rod near the back door, and the wooden box where I once kept fireflies. Graham no longer had a key. The first time he came after the case, he called ahead. When I opened the door, he was standing on the porch with a letter in his hand. He waited until I invited him inside. The letter apologized for his absence, for sharing my private records for signing the petition, and for trying to make the trust rescue a company Silas had deliberately protected it from. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for a key. He did not ask me to say everything was forgiven. I invited him in for coffee. That was all I could honestly offer. In December, I sat on the porch with the newspaper I used to read to Silas. Graham was inside making coffee, moving carefully through a house he no longer treated as his by right. Silas had not left me a completed victory. He had left me a responsibility. Maribel wanted to turn wealth into control. Graham wanted to use it as proof that he was not a failure. I chose to turn it into stability, opportunity, and boundaries. Justice did not take everything from the people who had harmed me. It only stopped them from taking anything else that did not belong to them. The house still stood, not because Silas had predicted the storm perfectly, but because when it came, he had trusted the right person to know what should be preserved, what needed repair, and which doors should never be opened again with the same key. Do you think Silas was right to give control of the trust to the person who truly cared for him? Or should Graham have received more simply because he was his son? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay with the channel for more stories about betrayal justice and women who learned how to protect themselves.